Hi, welcome to the Good Spiel. Now, forgiveness is integral to the Christian life. We only have to glance at the cross to know that God forgives. And so to be Christian really means to feel loved and forgiven, and so we in turn can love and forgive others. It's in the nature of God to forgive, not condemn. But the cross isn't the only example of God's mercy. There are many examples in the Bible, and the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery in John's Gospel is a good one. Now one day Jesus is teaching in the grounds of the temple, when a crowd of men bring to him a woman who they claim to have been caught in the act of adultery. But Jesus doesn't seem over concerned about this, and he doodles in the dust of the ground to show his indifference. But the crowd persist. They don't think Jesus will enforce the penalty for the breaking of the law of Moses, as this woman and a man have done. They think Jesus too liberal, too loving and forgiving, to agree that this woman be stoned to death. They think he'll just simply let her off, and Jesus knows this. Eventually, Jesus comes up with the famous line, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And the crowd, convicted by their own conscience, then lay down their stones and disperse. That leaves Jesus and the woman alone. Jesus says to her, "Where are your accusers? Who condemns you?" She says, "No one." And he adds, "Nor do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." So the crowd bring this woman to Jesus, insisting that she's been caught in the act of adultery, even though there isn't a man present. We wonder how you can be caught in the act of adultery alone, but nevertheless, this crowd are insistent that that was the case. And presumably, because that's true, there's no need of witnesses or a trial, and they can go straight on with the execution. Now, one thing they are correct about is that under the law, Leviticus chapter 20, anyone caught in the act of adultery is liable to be stoned to death, and that goes for both parties. But Jesus doesn't seem to be interested in what's being said. And we wonder, is he prepared to break the law of his father, the law given through Moses, the great teacher? The answer to that is no. Jesus never breaks the law of his father, though he may apply the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Now, the family is the basic building block of God's society. We know that from Genesis. We live in family units. Now, that may be 10 people, it may be 8 or 6 or 2 or even 1, but they're all interconnected and support one another. Children have parents or a parent or people in place of parents, so they're protected. And God does all he can to protect the family unit, the building block, and his law reflects that. So society is made safer by the 10 Commandments. So we can see that anything that threatens the family unit is seen as a danger to God's plan. And that's why adultery is seen as a very, very serious problem and placed in the same rank as murder and rape, a terrible crime, and carries the severest penalty. But let's suppose that Jesus agrees for the woman to be executed, and when they find him, the man concerned. But what good would that do? The couple concerned probably had children, so there'd be children without a mother and there'd be children without a father. A woman would be left without a husband, a provider, and a man would be left without his wife to look after his children while he was at work. Women didn't do paid work then, and there were no stay-at-home dads. So for 2 families, there would be enormous problems. So who would really suffer in this situation? It would be the children, the family. But why punish them? Is that what God really wants? Of course not. But that's what the letter of the law says. So why does adultery carry the death sentence? I imagine that something like 90% of people who attempted to commit adultery would be put off by the severity of the death sentence if they were caught. I imagine that many that thought about it would probably think again and not bother. So you could argue that if there wasn't a death sentence, more people might commit adultery and the consequences would be worse for everyone. But what about those who are not put off by the death sentence? What does God really want to happen to them? Now let's look at Jesus' response to the crowd again. Those wonderful words, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." But for me, the more important ones come later on, when Jesus speaks for God and says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And these last words, "go and sin no more," are exactly what God wants in this situation. He wants the two parties to return to their families and to do what was wanted all along, to become good family members. Now Jesus shows us here that God isn't over keen for us to go around looking for the sins in others. He would prefer it that we left that to him and he would sort it out. He would rather that we were more concerned with our own situation rather than other people's. But in order to forgive others, we need to do two things. Firstly, realise that God has forgiven us and is asking us to sin no more, as he has done here with this woman. And secondly, to forgive ourselves. We may be so weighed down with guilt and sense of failure about ourselves that we have no forgiving heart for others. Well, firstly, we need to look at our own past and live with it peacefully. I don't say forget the past because there's a lot of good in there, but we need to understand it. And most of us do what we think is the right thing at the time. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. We all say the wrong thing at some time, though we meant well. And sometimes it feels as though we're doing okay, but we don't seem to do as well as many others. We don't seem to be as happy as other people are. But the world can be a very difficult place, and the truth isn't always obvious. Jesus warns us about the secular world. He tells us the world loves its own. It loves those who do well in its own eyes by its own standards, the wealthy and the successful. And it looks with contempt on some, the single parent struggling alone, the unemployed, the man and woman on the street through no fault of their own. It ignores them and pushes them aside as failures. But God has no use for treatment like that, and neither do we. So let's accept God's forgiveness and start from today. Hear Jesus speaking to you. Who condemns you? I don't condemn you. And move forward with love and forgiveness in your heart. Try to see others as God sees them, as people simply trying their best, in need of forgiveness and understanding. Well, thanks for watching the Good Spiel today, and God bless you.